It is a source of frustration when she responds to my questions with new questions without pausing to consider them. Regardless of the question or the answer, she consistently replies with another question. This occurs in any situation. For example, when I asked Megan about her dinner, she responded with a question about what I had cooked. Similarly, when I asked her where she wanted to move the chair, she replied, "Where did I say I wanted to put it?" This pattern persists across a range of topics. My queries were, however, met with further queries. There was, however, one exception. The final question I posed to her was the only time she was unable to respond with another question. I am curious as to the nature of the question. It consisted of 6 simple words accompanied by a questioning intonation. However, the most challenging question to answer was why I decided to stay. This question left her without a response. Unfortunately, I was already aware that she would be unable to answer it. Those who engage in cheating are unable to respond in this way. They may provide complex explanations, but they are aware of the truth. The challenge is to help them recognize this from the outset. In my case, I should have anticipated this outcome. My marriage was troubled from the beginning. I should have heeded my father's advice and followed the 8 principles he believed a man should adhere to. The first is that life is pleasant as long as you do not complicate it. The second is the work in question becomes challenging only when motivation is lacking. Thirdly, to gain insight into what your wife will be like in 20 years, it is advisable to observe her mother. Fourthly, a woman requires significant effort to avoid becoming like her mother. Fifthly, while friends may come and go, true friends remain constant. Sixthly, it is prudent to avoid giving all of one's money to one's spouse. Seventhly, the deceived person is undeserving of half, regardless of what the judge may say. Eighthly, physical attractiveness diminishes over time. The perception of beauty is subject to change over time, yet the intrinsic value of true beauty remains constant. My father often observed that if my mother disappeared, her purse would remain. This could signify that she had either run away or been pursued by my father. In the latter case, her purse would likely remain, as he did not provide her with anything. My father spoke in a voice loud enough for my mother to hear him. He frequently asserted that she would leave our marriage with only what she had brought with her, and nothing more. I have always been curious about the factors that could instill such intense animosity in an individual. It was one of life's lessons that I realized later, and now I am aware of a new one. I have never been inclined to share my life story, so I will not delve into it here. However, I will state its essence. My name is Henry. I was born in North Texas into a loving family. My father had a tendency to snap at me regardless of whether I deserved it or not. Fortunately, my mother was the mainstay who supported our family. Next to me were my sisters, Kelly and Ann, as well as my younger brother, Carlton, and my sister, Megan, were the next members of my immediate family. Megan and I first met in the 8th grade. Her beauty immediately captivated me, and it was like love at first sight. However, it wasn't until our sophomore year of college that we became a couple. If you're interested in finding out the reason for this delay, you should inquire with Megan's father. This man felt sharp anger whenever anyone approached his daughter and behaved like a protective hound. It took 3 long years before I was permitted to sit on the porch of their house for a period of time, and another year elapsed before I was allowed to converse with her by telephone. It appeared to me that he was eavesdropping, as he interjected with a sharp no before she had the opportunity to inquire whether she could speak with me. Consequently, I was astonished when I mustered the courage to request his permission to marry Megan. To my astonishment, he consented and even referred to me as a son. 6 years have elapsed since that time, during which I was regarded as foolish and feeble. He was kind-hearted and uneducated, and now I have become his son. My path in married life was far from boring, especially when Megan was next to me. Despite the difficulties we faced over the next 15 years, we managed to find the strength and happiness we needed to work, rest, share private moments, and be happy when we had 3 precious children, Tommy, Jessica, and Paul. Our little darlings brought great joy into our lives. However, it was in the 25th year of our life together that everything collapsed. The only reason I didn't dare to leave the country was the thought that I would leave our children there. Two of the three children had already left home, and the third child, Tommy, was preparing to leave for university in Florida, while Jessica had enrolled in Knoxville and Paul had recently graduated from high school and was going to continue his education in Gainesville. As a young man, Paul decided to celebrate the last night spent at home with a grand party. Unfortunately, he made an impulsive decision to drive under the influence of alcohol, which resulted in a collision with a pole and subsequent hospitalization. Megan and I promptly proceeded to the hospital. Paul's lung was severely compromised, necessitating a kidney transplant. His own kidneys were also severely damaged, indicating the urgent need for a suitable donor. A suitable donor. The doctor requested permission to conduct a blood test to ascertain my suitability. Megan was observing us with a perplexed expression, as if attempting to comprehend something. Abruptly, she stated, "Do not trouble yourself, he is not Paul's father." I was taken aback and took a step back, regarding her with a sense of astonishment. I attempted to grasp her, but the doctor interjected, urging me to refrain from acting on impulse. I was confused and in need of answers. I requested an explanation from Megan, but the doctor intervened, suggesting she bring Paul's father to assist. I felt disoriented and began to exit, but a sudden shift in my emotional state prompted me to reconsider. I discarded my wedding ring on the floor and proceeded to enter the room. It then occurred to me that he might not be my son, but what was of greater consequence was ensuring he received the requisite assistance. Upon the arrival of Megan and the doctor, I instinctively turned away and left. The doctor, however, firmly grasped my hand and urged me to remain, emphasizing the urgency of the situation. At that moment, Paul and I both felt an involuntary response. I agreed and remained at his side as night fell. Paul's father joined us an hour later. My brother Carlton, who appeared to be aware of the situation, arrived just as I was about to explain. I observed that Paul had already received a blood transfusion, which was a cause for concern given that Paul's father was Megan's brother. At that moment, Carlton, my own brother, and the doctor, Megan, left the room. I found my answer. Carlton came in and attempted to explain, but I was unable to cope with the situation and left the ward, unable to cope in the waiting room. I observed Abby, Carlton's wife, crying. I was uncertain if her distress was related to Paul's condition or the unexpected revelation about Carlton and Megan. Ultimately, the specifics of both matters were irrelevant, both were highly complex. A doctor approached, emphasizing the importance of providing support to Paul and Megan. I was urged to be strong, and I came to understand that they would require my assistance. I inquired as to the specific actions I was expected to take to fulfill this role. I asked what I should do and how I could provide support in this challenging situation. To my surprise, she revealed that, in fact, my son is my nephew. She had engaged in an affair with my brother for an unknown period of time, although it has been at least 18 years since Paul was born. I was grappling with these revelations and wondered how I should interact with Carlton now that I could no longer refer to him as my brother. A betrayal, leaving their children to be raised by another in search of advice, led to a meeting with a man who presented himself as a doctor with the hope of receiving comfort. Perhaps he could prescribe something to help me cope with this situation. I even inquired as to whether there were special glasses for detecting signs of infidelity. Is there any hope for reconciliation after treason? I am in desperate need of a way to cut my brother out of my life. Perhaps you have a solution to erase these memories from my mind. However, I doubt that such a solution exists. Please leave me alone. I implored the doctor to focus on helping Paul. My marriage and my life do not depend on your help. The doctor then proceeded to leave the room, sighing disapprovingly. I approached Abby and inquired about the information Carlton had shared with her. Abby informed me that all three of my children were, in fact, Carlton's. I was taken aback by this revelation. I then asked how Megan could have possibly known about my alleged infertility. After all, I had only visited the hospital once, at the age of 10. I was determined to uncover the truth and urgently needed to reveal it. It was not until 11 o'clock that I finally. On the following morning, the doctor finally informed us that Paul would be fine. It transpired that Carlton's kidney was perfectly normal. As I headed for the exit, Megan and the doctor hurriedly approached me, just as the door was closing. Megan attempted to reach out to me, but the doctor intervened and prevented her from doing so. Megan inquired as to my destination and expressed concern for our son Paul. It was distressing for me to hear her refer to him as our son without saying a word. I drove up to the house and discovered that it was already 30 minutes past the hour. Following a visit to Home Depot and the purchase of 2 sets of locks, I commenced changing the locks on the house. Having commenced the collection of Megan's clothes, I was able to fill 4 bags before an unexpected call was received. This proved to be from her father, who wished to speak with me before I took any drastic action. I was unable to help but doubt his suspicions. "Come on, Dad," I replied. "What reasons can I have to take action without waiting for his answer?" I terminated the conversation abruptly, continuing to pack Megan's belongings. My thoughts were preoccupied with Paul and the events that had transpired between us. Memories of our lengthy discussions in psychology classes resurfaced in my memory. The nature versus nurture debate resurfaced in my mind with the question of whether DNA determines one's gender. From my perspective, I had always believed that he was biologically mine. I recalled his first steps, catching a soccer ball, his first fight, his first date, and his first kiss. The bond between Paul and me was strengthened by precious moments, but when Paul really needed a father figure, I failed to provide the necessary support. Despite my willingness to donate blood and a kidney, I was unable to assist at the most critical moment when he needed help. Megan's infidelity further complicated the situation when the doctor informed Paul that he required a kidney. It was as if my son had ceased to be mine. Our surname will remain, but what will happen to my own branch on the family tree? It will simply wither while the Carlton branch flourishes, having 7 descendants, 4 children by Abby and 3 by Megan, which makes him the epitome of a family stud. These thoughts began to overwhelm me, causing a throbbing headache and feelings of being overwhelmed and needing a break. I went to the fridge absently. I procured a beer and took my place in my preferred chair. Upon turning on the television, I was drawn to the sound of approaching vehicles. I remained in my seated position, holding onto the beer, and lost in my thoughts as the sound of persistent knocking echoed. I then became aware of a group of 4 or 5 individuals awaiting my attention outside. After approximately 10 minutes, Megan finally arrived, attempting to use a key that her father had instructed her to use to unlock the door. However, their astonishment was evident when the key failed after I had finished my beer. I opened the door, curious, and inquired of my father why they had come. My father, assuming a representative role, asked if they could come in and talk. I agreed, but insisted that Carlton and Megan stay behind. Meanwhile, Megan sat on the porch, tears flowing. They came to realize that their expectations would not be met over the next 2 hours. I revealed the entire truth to them. Everyone except Abby and me already knew the truth. It was challenging to accept that these individuals were my relatives. Abby expressed empathy for Megan's emotional state. Paradoxically, my father, who had previously shared insights on navigating infidelity, now encouraged me to accept my wife's unfaithfulness. He conveyed that becoming a grandparent had altered his perspective and justified Megan's actions. For the sake of the family, I desired, despite his explanation. I found myself questioning why society deemed it acceptable for a woman to actively pursue a child, whereas a man faced different expectations when his wife could not conceive. It appeared that only women were permitted to deviate from societal norms. The notion that men are exempt from the necessity of forming families and witnessing the growth of children in their partners' wombs challenges the conventional definition of masculinity. In the midst of the chaos and senseless discourse surrounding the prioritization of children and the maintenance of a single family unit, I felt out of place and overwhelmed by thoughts that women without the ability to conceive were deemed too emotional and without hope. Those who were unable to conceive were perceived as being overly emotional and lacking hope. I was additionally burdened by the societal expectation that a muscular physique was a prerequisite for blessings. I was unable to contain my frustration and demanded that everyone leave the truth. However, I subsequently learned that she had been unfaithful to me and had children with my brother. This led me to question whether this was considered a blessing. Upon reflection, I realized that my mother had previously shared this information with her. This revelation illuminated the underlying reason behind my inability to have children, namely, my contracting of yellow fever at the age of 10. Megan had been aware of this information but had chosen to withhold it from me. It was disheartening to recognize the nature of her role as a mother after she had finally brought the children home. The children returned unexpectedly an hour later, having called Megan's parents instead of staying with her. I spent the next hour elucidating the situation without holding back any details. Jessica found it challenging to accept the truth. Tommy immediately ordered a DNA test, intending to confront Megan. He reassured me that the result would not affect our relationship, as I would always be his father regardless of the outcome. Despite his initial reluctance, Tommy agreed to carry out Jessica's plan to uncover the truth. The following day, we visited the hospital. First, we saw Paul, then we began taking blood samples while Jessica went to Megan's house. Tommy and I took turns looking after Paul for several hours. Eventually, we returned home, a sense of finality pervading the air. As time passed, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly tense. On the third day, the hospital called with the long-awaited results. The results were awaited. Jessica was the only one with my bloodline. This discovery cleared all doubts about my fertility. Tommy left the room abruptly, his emotions too strong to contain. It appeared that Megan had been unfaithful since the second year of their marriage. Less than 2 years later, she became pregnant with Tommy. Upon receiving the DNA results, which confirmed my suspicions, I filed for divorce. I handed the results to my lawyer, determined to secure the full compensation to which I believed I was entitled and not to accept a 50-50 split. I adhere to the conviction that, in cases of infidelity, society typically demands justice and material retribution. In cases of infidelity, the injured party is often urged to take everything possible, yet the reaction is often doubtful, with questions like, "What did you do wrong?" instead of seeking professional help. This was the case for me when I lost many friends, including parents and relatives who were aware of the situation. At the conclusion of our final meeting, Megan requested a 30-minute private conversation. This period encompassed 25 years of marriage and 23 years of infidelity, which had spanned several months. Despite my lack of precise records, I was unable to tolerate further deception. Even in our final meeting, every sentence felt like a question. Megan inquired as to whether I considered her to have been a good. My wife inquired as to whether I had overlooked any pertinent details and questioned the strength of our mutual love. She even asked if I had seriously considered leaving. It was challenging for me to grasp the situation. Finally, I posed a question to her that she was unable to answer. In the following 10 minutes, I summarized the events of the previous 2 years of our marriage. I then turned to Megan and asked why I should even consider. Without awaiting an answer, I rose from my seat and departed. The divorce was concluded within 90 days, with no alimony or child support forthcoming from me. Megan was ultimately required to pay me $1,350 per month for a period of 5 years. The house was allocated to Jessica, thus enabling me to resume financial independence. At the time of receiving the DNA test results, I was unemployed and without a salary. I made the decision to terminate my employment as Megan had been engaging in infidelity for over 2 decades. It appeared inequitable for the judge to mandate that I provide financial support for her transgressions. Presently, I have no funds in my bank account, which I am utilizing to cover Paul's medical expenses. Abby brought unexpected news. My parents, along with Megan and Carlton, had devised a plan to reunite our family. Despite the circumstances, Abby and I spent the next 3 hours strategizing and having fun together. However, our efforts were ultimately futile, as during their intended visit, Paul, Tommy and I were supposed to go on a cruise, returning from which, Jessica informed me that my lawyer was ready to sue Carlton for 23 years of non-payment of alimony. The payment of alimony was demanded at the sum of $350. Abby immediately demanded a divorce, citing the sum of $100,000 for each child as the financial settlement. While I had not formally adopted Paul or Tommy, they recognized me as their father, connected to them not by blood ties but by an attachment formed due to my constant presence. 10 years have passed, and at the age of 62, I am the primary caregiver to 2 children, aged 5 and 10. My wife, Abby, aged 52, has remained in the marriage despite the use of Carlton's alimony for the benefit of our children. It was never my intention to seek revenge on Abby by marrying her. Furthermore, I am not concerned with the implications of our relationship with the Carlton family. Megan once suggested that she would wait indefinitely to exact revenge on me, and even Jessica finds this amusing. My parents encouraged Jessica and Abby to persuade me to visit them before they die, under the impression that I do, however, regret not being there. However, that is unlikely, as they are already 80 and 82, respectively, and have Carlton to keep them company. That was an entertaining anecdote. Now, let us move on to another equally engaging one. I first met my wife in 1994, and our mutual appreciation for Tupac Shakur's music brought us together. The connection was established on the foundation of a shared interest in rap music, despite the fact that neither my family nor hers had any inclination towards it. They exhibited a preference for classical music, country and jazz. Our paths crossed at a Tupac Shakur concert in Milwaukee over 29 years ago. We happened to be seated adjacent to each other, engaging in conversation throughout the entire evening. Before parting, we exchanged pager numbers and she provided her phone number and the location of her dormitory room in our shared dormitory, where the phone was shared by all residents of the corridor. In retrospect, I recognize that I should have been able to discern her character based on that experience. There was a particular moment at the concert that stands out in my memory. Despite my inability to recall the name of the performing group, I distinctly remember selecting some girls backstage. While others were asked to leave when the organizers invited the girls to take the stage, my wife, Toni, her real name, shouted with delight, "Choose me, choose me." We both knew what usually happens behind the scenes in such situations. At the time, I was 22 years old, and it is noteworthy that my father purchased the concert tickets as a reward for my excellent college performance in the previous quarter. Despite not fully understanding my love for rap, Toni also faced family misunderstandings. Due to her passion for rap music conflicting with her strict Catholic upbringing, she was never chosen among those dancing on stage and occasionally exposing herself personally. I attended the concert to appreciate the music rather than indulge in explicit displays. When Tupac finally came on stage, I immersed myself in the music, enjoying every moment of it. Despite the expectation that Tupac would perform, the orchestrating members of the onstage dancers were in fact members of a local rap group. Nevertheless, Toni and I remained in contact and eventually arranged a date. Fortunately, her college was within walking distance of mine, which made the trip quite acceptable. Our first date was at the Ponderosa restaurant, and I mention it because it served as a wake-up call. It is unfortunate that she exhibited inappropriate behavior by initiating sexual intercourse in the restroom. At the time, we were in a relatively quiet and sparsely populated place, which made me question the frequency of such behavior on her part. After the incident, she claimed that I should consider myself lucky since she does not engage in such activities with just anyone. That night, I stayed overnight. The following day, we both decided to skip classes and spent the entire day in a passionate relationship. My youthful excitement at the age of 22, combined with her openness, made me feel like I was on cloud nine. Afterwards, I returned home, reflecting on the incredible experience. However, at the same time, I was also concerned that she might be just a promiscuous despite her assertion that she was not promiscuous. The following day she telephoned me to express her longing for me and her desire to live together. I advised her to refrain from allowing her feelings to impede her academic studies. Before I could complete my sentence, she began to launch a volley of insults, accusing me of being no different from the other individuals with whom she had had dealings. She made it clear that despite my attempts to assure her of my sincere affection, she was of the opinion that I was no exception. She used foul language and expressed her disappointment at the constant rough treatment she had received. She abruptly ended the conversation, seemingly desperate to make peace. I tried to contact her several times, but she still did not answer. A whole week passed without communication, and the feeling of uncertainty did not leave me. In consideration of my subsequent actions, I elected to compose a written communication to her with the intention of resuming communication in the cozy dormitory room. I awaited her response with patience for approximately 30 minutes until she finally replied, requesting that I call her. I hastened to the shared telephone that served all of us, only to discover that it had already been occupied. I approached the individual in possession of the telephone and inquired if I might use it. I was disconcerted to discover that the phone was occupied by my former roommate, who was discourteous enough to reply, "Calm down and wait for your turn." I was exasperated and decided to leave, intending to return when the phone became available. After a period of 30 minutes, I returned, only to find that the former neighbor still occupied the place by the phone. My initial attempt having failed, I went back to my room later in the evening at approximately 8 o'clock. I decided to try again, but the gentleman in question was still engaged in conversation. I was becoming increasingly annoyed, so I asked him to conclude his discussion and take my call. However, he responded with rude gestures indicating that I would not be able to reach him that evening. I therefore opted to contact her the following morning on Saturday when I had no work obligations until noon. Despite several attempts to call, I chose to reach out to her. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to elicit a response. I then attempted to page her, but still received no answer. It took another 2 months before our paths crossed again. This occurred on a Sunday while I was bowling with friends in another part of Milwaukee. To my surprise, she was among a group of girls and 2 guys doing the same activity. I seized the opportunity I approached her and greeted her with a simple hello. In response, she looked at me, her face lighting up with joy. Without hesitation, she rushed to me and hugged me tightly, expressing her delight at our unexpected meeting. She exclaimed, "My God! It's really you," and wrapped her arms around my neck. She then proceeded to share that she expressed genuine regret at our previous meeting, and I took the opportunity to clarify my position. I suggested that we could continue to meet, emphasizing the importance of not letting it interfere with our studies. It is worth noting that we both skipped classes the day after our first date, although I did not. I wished to convey this idea to her in an honest manner, and, upon understanding my perspective, she agreed, expressing a desire to maintain a friendly relationship over time. Our relationship continued to evolve and we started thinking about a more serious future together. Finally, the day arrived when we both proudly graduated from our colleges. In June, we became a close couple with a shared vision for our future. She relocated to the city where I lived, securing employment as a teacher at an elementary school, while I obtained a position as a mechanical draftsman. Our lives began to take shape in a surprisingly natural way when she moved in with me. There was mutual affection between us, and 2 years later, I felt the time had come for the next step in our relationship. I proposed to her, solidifying our love and commitment in 1997. We proceeded to hastily get married in a modest ceremony at her church, which was located an hour away from our families. Shortly before the wedding, she planned a trip with new friends from our apartment building. I had no desire to arrange a bachelor party or similar celebrations. I was confident that she would not engage in any reckless behavior during the trip until 2002. I was unaware of the enjoyable experiences she had during that trip. She asserted that she wished to enjoy life beyond the responsibilities of raising our children. She clarified that this did not involve private relationships or drinking. I concurred, assuming that everything was fine throughout the 4-day trip. During the day trip, she only called me once, on the day before her scheduled return. My intuition told me that something was wrong. It was not just a feeling, I felt nauseous and restless the entire time she was away. My parents attributed this to pre-wedding nerves, but I sensed that something was not right. Fast forward to when our daughter turned 4. I sometimes regret not having the resilience that many modern young people have now. Although I distanced myself from it, the pain resurfaced when I discovered that she was not my biological daughter. One Christmas, my 12-year-old nephew and his friends repeatedly approached me, insisting that they urgently needed to talk. After their 5th attempt, I reluctantly entered the bedroom and promised not to get angry. They revealed that they had some videos, and to my surprise, one of them was an adult film featuring my wife and her friend Frankie. My wife's new acquaintances from our apartment building, who reside downstairs, were revealed to be Frankie, our downstairs neighbor. I requested to view the recording, but my nephew's friends commenced a dispute, attempting to persuade each other to fast forward, stating that they had missed the pertinent scene. It subsequently became evident that this was the section of the recording that depicted my wife engaging in sexual activity at the same time she was pregnant was finally revealed. Despite the efforts of her friends to persuade her to consume alcohol, she repeatedly refused. I observed and heard her discussing the man who was filming her. She stated that she observed a desire in his trousers and desired to experience it for herself. Her friends discussed her plans to establish a closer relationship with him, and she confirmed that as soon as the cameras were turned off, he would belong to her. I shouted loudly and fearfully, "In what universe is this acceptable? My nephew is scared, and I am too." Despite this, the recording continued. The person filming inquired as to whether my wife was married, to which she replied in the affirmative, confirming that we were officially married at that time. I then realized that the video was from a bachelorette party, as I recognized her friends in the background. It then occurred to me that we had signed the marriage certificate 2 weeks before the official wedding. Returning to the video, I heard my wife express her dissatisfaction with me, calling me boring. She then admitted that she wanted a more confident and adventurous man. I then asked my nephew to turn off the video and hand it to me. His friends gave me the tape in the living room. I informed my wife that it was time to leave. She was bewildered and I repeated, "Hurry up and pack your things. We are leaving." I did not repeat my apologies to my family. I promptly took the woman I had assumed to be my spouse and we departed. In the vehicle, I informed her of my observations, but she feigned a lack of comprehension and denied any involvement in the video experiment. Notably, on our return journey, she abruptly grasped the tape and hurled it from the car window. I retrieved it from the nearby store parking lot and returned to the vehicle. I was surprised to see that my wife was crying and my daughter was asleep. I asked her why she was so upset and mentioned that even if she was not in the video, it was still a relief to me, despite my strong belief that she was in the video. Her persistent refusals began to make me doubt. We reached home and, as planned, she put the baby to bed. We agreed to talk later and watch the video together to finally understand her role. While watching, I found a part where she explicitly discussed lovemaking with the person filming, who seemed angry. I returned to the room and saw her peacefully sleeping with our child. Having made up my mind, I woke her and informed her that I was aware that she was feigning ignorance. She began to weep audibly, seemingly hoping to rouse the child from sleep. I urged her to join the viewing in order to provide evidence of her innocence and bring the ordeal to a swift conclusion. I warned her that I would initiate divorce proceedings if she refused. She was eventually persuaded to comply. I then exited the room and sat on the sofa, pressing the play button. It became evident that she was in the video, with the same hairstyle, voice, and other details matching. However, she remained steadfast in her denial of involvement. I looked at her, expressing my disbelief, and rewound the tape to watch it again, including the disturbing content of her insulting me despite the convincing evidence to the contrary. I then pointed out that her friends Frankie and Cassandra were present during the incident. Cassandra was also present, attempting to persuade her to drink. Embarrassed, she confessed that it was Frankie and someone else who had seized the opportunity. I emphasized that the video captured her telling a complete stranger that she would engage in private activity with him as soon as the camera turned off. Overwhelmed, she began to cry, attempting to apologize. I was confused and shocked by my wife's explanation, which was that she did not know what had happened. I was unable to comprehend her rationale and maintained that she was compelled to participate. She asserted that her actions were solely for the camera and that she was merely pretending, despite her pleas for forgiveness. I experienced a sense of anger and betrayal. I swiftly retrieved my jacket and keys, deciding to leave the scene, as I came to realize the gravity of the situation. I acknowledged the necessity to consult a lawyer and to undertake a DNA test to determine my daughter's biological parentage. I informed my brother of the distressing news. I advised my brother to refrain from attributing blame to his son, my nephew. I informed him that we should not hold his son responsible for taking the tape, as we had engaged in similar activities in our youth, namely the searching for temporary housing, which involved the use of magazines. I remained with my close friend, Russell, with whom I had a robust relationship developed through our previous collaboration. Throughout this period, I sought the assistance of a divorce lawyer, attending consultations with Cantor on a daily basis for a week. Eventually, I identified a suitable lawyer and I elucidated the circumstances to him, underscoring the necessity for a legally conducted DNA test on my daughter, absent my wife's consent. She explicitly expressed her reluctance to undergo the test, rendering the process fraught with stress and requiring the intervention of a judge to compel my wife's agreement. Initially, the judge rejected our petition, citing my prior signature on the birth certificate and the details of the conversation between my lawyer. The judge's decision was not disclosed to me. However, my lawyer successfully persuaded the judge to change his decision. The test was conducted and the results confirmed that the child was not biologically mine. This was despite my wife's insistence that the result was false. The test was repeated to confirm the results. As a representative, I had to cover the costs once again. I informed her family of my decision to divorce their daughter. I revealed that she was already pregnant before our marriage due to her deceit. This hastily arranged wedding was a consequence of her deception, as she had lied about many things after sharing the DNA test results. Consequently, I left. We subsequently discovered that the child's biological father is Frankie, a close friend of my wife and our neighbor. This revelation led to a serious quarrel between Frankie and my wife had an affair prior to my wife moving in with me. She later learned of her pregnancy from the man with whom she had been intimate. Despite her deception, she attempted to manipulate me into marrying her. She continued to maintain a friendly appearance towards her friend, the woman I married. My wife was, in fact, deceitful. I recently received official notification that our divorce is finalized on the same day as my ex-wife. My wife contacted me and proposed a meeting and a discussion. I was curious and agreed to the meeting, understanding her intentions. I asked about her daughter's father, leaving her confused. We both knew that one mistake could ruin a marriage. I emphasized that even one wrong step might be enough to ruin my love and marriage. She then admitted being very upset that her parents didn't want to communicate with her. She expressed concerns about raising. I informed her that it was her own fault and that I wished her luck. I then ended the conversation as I found her expectations of a reconciliation absurd. I felt sorry for the child, who was blameless in this situation. It has been approximately 2 years since I began raising a daughter alone, who is not biologically mine. Some may view this as an unusual and misguided decision, given that I am raising someone else's child. However, I had no choice in the matter, as my ex-wife, following the dissolution of our marriage, my former wife left our child and entered into a relationship with a new partner. During the subsequent period of separation, she experienced a depressive episode, initially turning to alcohol and later resorting to illicit substances. She subsequently entered into a relationship with a man with a history of arrests for theft and substance misuse. I obtained custody of my daughter and later adopted her, thereby removing my former wife's parental rights. I am confident that she will be held accountable for her actions, both with regard to her abandonment of our child and her subsequent behavior.